Exodus 10:1-29. Exodus 10:1-29. NKJV. Now the Lord said to Moses, Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine before him, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your son's son the mighty things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron came into Pharaoh and said to him, Thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory, and they shall cover the face of the earth, so that no one will be able to see the earth, and they shall eat the residue of what is left, which remains to you from the hail, and they shall eat every tree which grows up for you out of the field. They shall fill your houses, the houses of all your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen, since the day that they were on the earth to this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh's servants said to him, How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed? So Moses and Aaron were brought again to Pharaoh, and he said to them, Go, serve the Lord your God. Who are the ones that are going? And Moses said, We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds we will go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. Then he said to them, The Lord had better be with you when I let you and your little ones go. Beware, for evil is ahead of you. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord, for that is what you desired. And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. And the locusts went up over all the land of Egypt and rested on all the territory of Egypt. They were very severe. Previously there had been no such locusts as they, nor shall there be such after them. For they covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened. And they ate every herb of the land and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. So there remained nothing green on the trees or on the plants of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore, please forgive my sin only this once, and entreat the Lord your God that he may take away from me this death only. So he went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord, and the Lord turned a very strong west wind, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, Go, serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you. But Moses said, You must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also shall go with us, not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God. And even we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, Get away from me. Take heed to yourself and see my face no more, for in the day you see my face you shall die. So Moses said, You have spoken well. I will never see your face again. UCG Bible Commentary contains 2 sections. 1. Exodus 8:20-10, Commentary. Note, following bookended section of recording is a rereading of the commentary read also on the prior day. Still more plagues. Flies to locusts. Before sending the 4th plague, God says that he will prevent it and the remainder of the plagues from afflicting the Israelites in Goshen. Thus the first 3 plagues had been experienced by everyone, including the Israelites. But the 7 last plagues out of 10 afflict the Egyptians only. That the 7 last plagues are distinct is quite interesting in light of the fact that we actually find this phrase in Revelation 15:1 in reference to the final plagues poured out on rebellious mankind, following a period of suffering that will come on God's people, physical and spiritual, and on the rest of the world. And just as in Egypt, God's people of the end time will be spared the 7 last plagues. 4. Flies. Concerning the word flies, the Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary states that these were not flies such as we are accustomed to, or perhaps not only such flies as Egypt had, it still has those too, but diverse sorts of flies, i.e. flying buzzing insects. P.S. 7845. The gadfly, the cockroach, the Egyptian beetle, for all these are mentioned by different writers. The worship of flies, particularly of the beetle in the form of the scarab god Keper, was a prominent part of the religion of the ancient Egyptians. 1961. Note on Exodus 8:20-31. Furthermore, as the flies crawled all over them, flew into their eyes, covered their food, and buzzed incessantly around them, adding to their misery, where was the supreme Amun, helper of the pious and god of the wind, to blow away this plague? Where was the guardian goddess Maftet and the protector god Sed? Finally, the divine Pharaoh begins to bargain, agreeing to let the Israelites sacrifice to God in Goshen. But Moses points out that this would be an abomination to the Egyptians, since they considered it detestable to sacrifice sheep. See Genesis 3:32, Genesis 46:34, and that, now really hating the Israelites, they might stone them. So with flies still buzzing around him, Pharaoh agrees to let the Israelites travel a short way into the wilderness to sacrifice. But once again, the stubborn ruler changes his mind. 5. Death of livestock. As in most pagan societies, oxen had strong attachments to various deities in Egypt. Apis, the bull god, was the living personification of the creation god Ptah. The creator sun gods Atum and Re, later syncretized into a single deity, were represented by the black bull Nevis of Heliopolis. Nut and Neith were both depicted as the great celestial cow who gave birth to the cosmos and other deities. Mehet Wart, another goddess associated with creation, was depicted as a cow. The mother goddesses Hathor and Nekhbet were both pictured with the form of a cow. Hesat, the goddess of birth, was depicted as a cow. And the foster mother of Horus, the cow goddess Sekhet-Hor, was even invoked to safeguard cattle, a prayer that now availed nothing in the face of the true God's power. It should also be noted here that the Egyptians did possess some sheep, Exodus 9:3, though apparently not for food or sacrifice, compare Exodus 8:26, and ram gods figure prominently in the Egyptian pantheon, Ba, Banbebjedat, the primeval Harishaf, and the Nile god Khnum. Even the supreme god, Amun, was symbolized by a ram with curved horns. The statement that all the livestock of Egypt died, Exodus 9:6, must actually mean that the vast majority of their animals died, as livestock are still alive in Exodus 9:19-21 and horses in Exodus 14:7-9. Even so, we can imagine that this was a major blow to the economy and military strength of Egypt. Once again, God spares the Israelites as Pharaoh discovers, but still he refuses to let God's people go. Boils. Once again, the false deities of Egypt are of no help, including Sekhmet, a guardian goddess against disease besides her major role as war goddess Imhotep, the god of medicine, and Isis, goddess of life and healing. Pharaoh's magicians are now too afflicted to be present, yet Pharaoh's heart is still hardened. Interestingly, the narrative for the first time states that God actually hardened Pharaoh's heart. Exodus 9:12, an intent God had earlier stated, Exodus 4:21, Exodus 7:3. Yet before this, Pharaoh is seen as hardening his own heart. Exodus 8:15, Exodus 8:32. God then is now reinforcing Pharaoh's stubborn inclination for the purpose described in verse 16, see Romans 9:14. To better understand this, please refer to the article Twist of Fate at Hail. Hail. This plague killed servants, animals, and cattle if they were not under shelter. Plants and trees were also destroyed, including crops in the field. That this was an extremely severe thunderstorm of icy hail, and that the fire darting to the ground was lightning is apparent from Psalm 78. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. He also gave up their cattle to the hail, and their flocks to fiery lightning. Psalm 78:47-48. These destructive elements, of course, had a devastating impact on the nation's food supply, and still the gods of Egypt were shown to be powerless. The sky goddesses Nut and Hathor, the sky god Horus, Shu, the god of air and bearer of heaven, Seth, the god of storms and protector of crops, Neper, the god of grain crops, Osiris, the ruler of life and vegetation, Isis, the goddess of life, and all the cow and ram deities mentioned above proved impotent before the true God. Pharaoh now relents for the time being. Of course, once the plague subsides, he again changes his mind. Locusts. By this point, Pharaoh's servants are attempting to impress on him that Egypt is destroyed. Exodus 10:7. So he resorts to bargaining with Moses once again. But as he will not accede to God's demands, a mighty wind brings an infestation of locusts on the land. The results are horrible to behold. Whatever vegetation had been left after the hail is now devoured by the locusts. The land is stripped bare. It must have been a wonder to look out over what was once a fertile, bountiful land, and to no longer see the color green among the plants. Verse 15. Again, Seth, Neper, Osiris, and Isis are all defied, as are Shu, god of the air, and Amun, god of the wind. This terrible plague must have left the nation on the brink of starvation. In desperation, Pharaoh even confesses sin and asks forgiveness, outwardly, but his contrition is short-lived. By now Moses may have become accustomed enough to Pharaoh's stubbornness so as to not be surprised when once again Pharaoh changes his mind about releasing the Israelites. End prior day rereading. 2. Exodus 10:21-11, Commentary, Darkness and Warning of the Final Plague. Final plagues and plundering the Egyptians. Darkness. Here is a plague that lasted for 3 days. People could not even leave their homes due to the impact of this event, comparable to being in a dark closet with even the cracks around the door being covered. This was a major attack on the credibility of the Egyptian sun god, known variously as Re, Ra, Atum, Aten, and sometimes Horus. Indeed, though the Egyptians worshipped many gods, none was worshipped as much as the sun. Consider too that as much as eclipses were feared in the ancient world, this 3-day darkness must have been terrifying beyond belief. Once again, it did not affect the Israelites living in Goshen. Pharaoh again attempts to make a deal by keeping the animals of the Israelites that were not affected by the plagues in Egypt. After all, the food supply of the Egyptians was now at a critical stage, so to him it was not really an unreasonable demand. But before God, Pharaoh was in no position to be making demands. Yet he was angry, to the point of threatening Moses with death if he would not get out of his sight. 10. Death of firstborn. Before leaving, Moses warned Pharaoh of the final plague that was to befall Egypt. The firstborn males of the Egyptians, of their non-Israelite servants, and of their animals would surely die, from the palace of Pharaoh to the dungeons. Perhaps this was, in part, a deserved punishment for the Egyptians' slaughtering of God's children, the Israelite infants, in previous generations going back to the time of Moses' birth. It was certainly for the reason God had given to Moses in Exodus 4. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I say to you, let my 8 of 9 son go that he may serve me. But if you refuse to let him go, indeed I will kill your son, your firstborn. Verses 22-23. Moreover, in killing the firstborn of the animals too, God was again showing his supremacy over the gods of Egypt. For I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt he will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Exodus 12:12. There would be no doubt left among the Egyptians that the God of Israel was indeed the true God. Besides the many and varied animal deities, God's action directly challenged Osiris, the giver and ruler of life. Furthermore, in the end this plague would accomplish the breaking of Egypt, and force Pharaoh to at last release the Israelites. This forcing of Pharaoh to act against his will would demonstrate God's overthrow of his sovereignty, and of the gods who represented it. Hu, the god personifying royal authority; Wadjet, the goddess of royal authority; Sobek, the god epitomizing the might of the pharaohs; Mut, goddess of cosmic order under whose aegis the rulers of Egypt governed; and the war goddess Sakhmet, who would supposedly breathe fire against the enemies of the pharaoh. God would of course prove himself victorious over them all, and over Pharaoh too, who, as mentioned earlier, was himself regarded as the divine incarnation of Horus. Even at the announcement of this warning, Moses and the Israelites were respected throughout the land because of the miraculous events that had taken place. And not just respected. As the Nelson Study Bible notes on Exodus 11:3, another remarkable component of the Exodus was the Egyptians' favor or grace toward the Hebrews and admiration for their leader. After all that had happened, we might expect the opposite, but the positive feelings for Moses were shared amazingly enough even by Pharaoh's servants. This too is a part of the wit and irony of this great victory the Lord had won over his enemy Pharaoh, who represents evil, sin, ungodliness, and even Satan. See Revelation 15:3. God told the Israelites to ask the Egyptians for silver and gold items, in effect, compensation for their years of slave labor. And after all the Egyptians had witnessed, they were not about to complain. But Pharaoh's heart was still hardened, even threatening Moses' life as already mentioned. Moses then, having delivered the final warning, at last storms out in anger. Exodus 11:8. This would be the final confrontation between the two. Compare Exodus 10:29. Supplementary reading, Archaeology in the Book of Exodus, Exit from Egypt, Good News Magazine, March-April 1997, pp. 22-24.